We are ready to go with our penultimate Sunday roundtable of 2024. And joining us this morning are Democratic political analyst Marianne Marsh, Republican political analyst Rob Gray. Good morning. Great to see you guys. Let's talk about housing. You know, Ed Augustus was just in the chair this week. He might be fighting the good fight for Governor Healey and the Commonwealth. But if the pace of progress remains sluggish, the political price could be as high as a single-family home. Is the Healey administration in trouble on this front here?
Not yet. I mean, I think you have to look at this past year as the year they got all the pieces in place,
Right.
and you had to pass legislation and everything else, and they've broken some ground. 4,000 units, that's not nothing. I think 2025 is the year you're going to see more construction and more housing provided, and that will be the real mark.
Yeah, what is your read on it, Rob?
I mean, I think as a political issue, it doesn't move many voters. Price of housing in Greater Boston it's been around for 2 decades plus. Both parties, governors of both parties, maybe had responsibility. The voters don't think they had responsibility, though. A lot of it is interest rates. Accessory dwelling, some of the things they're doing will help, but I don't think it motivates how people vote.
All right. Governor Healey defending her handling of the Stewart Hospital mess. Last week, she said she did all that she could do to address the crisis, but the closings of 2 hospitals and the uncertainty over the future of the survivors has led to a lot of finger pointing. Now, former Governor Charlie Baker, he had the MBTA as his albatross, catching fire in his final months in office. Will Stewart be Governor Healey's albatross? What do you think?
Well, here's the thing. If the T was an albatross for Charlie Baker, he still got reelected. So there are a lot of problems at the T, but they weren't problems that voters said we want to throw him out of office for. He had success on a lot of other fronts. I think Healey has handled the crisis well, as governor. The question is whether she, and really the Baker administration before her, handled the regulation of Stewart well in the past. But that's a complicated picture to paint for voters.
All right, what do you think, Marianne?
There's one person responsible for this mess, and it's Ralph Delatorre, whose greed and stripping of houses put patients' lives at risk while he was out on a yacht or 2 that he bought on top of everything else. So Maura Healey's left to clean up the mess of a greedy executive, and that's the reality here. And in the process, she not only saved most of the hospitals, she saved 13,000 jobs. So give her credit for that, but Ralph Delatorre is the problem here.
But isn't there some oversight requirement from government? If in other words, don't let the game get to the 9th inning and the bottom of the 9th inning before you start playing.
And I think Rob talked about that accurately. When you have a dirty dealer and a bad person involved, you can make the best efforts on regulation and stuff, and things can still go bad, and I think that's what happened here.
Let's talk about President-elect Donald Trump. He held court at Mar-a-Lago last week. An announcement about a $100 billion investment from a Japanese company turned into an hour-plus news conference. He riffed on everything from vaccines to his grievances about media companies. Rob, it feels and it presents like it's off the cuff, but is it really?
Well, I think he has a few key points he wants to make going into these things. But shooting from the lip, Donald Trump's specialty. And probably the reason why he did this, though, he wants to show up Joe Biden. Joe Biden is hiding out of public. If he's ever in public, it has to be on a teleprompter. Trump is basically taking the bull by the horns, saying, I'm the big player in town now. Even though I haven't been sworn in as president again, I'm going to show Joe Biden who's boss. That's why he's doing these types of things.
What do you think, Marianne?
Well, I think the person who's shown someone who's the boss is Elon Musk. Because Elon Musk is out there setting the agenda for Donald Trump these days. He's out there. I mean, I don't think he ever took the class How a Bill Becomes Law when he went after the continuing resolution agreement and all of that. But I think that Elon Musk is the one who seems to be setting the tempo. What they've never been able to do with Trump is stop him from tweeting at 3 a.m. That's the problem. So you hear many of the things, including that press conference Trump has said and other people around him have said, but it's Elon Musk right now who seems to be setting the tone.
It is amazing, just in the optic world, that Elon Musk is highly visible. Highly visible. More so than J.D. Vance.
Or Trump or Biden.
Yeah.
If Trump thinks he's getting too much attention, he may push Elon Musk off the island. We'll see. Not a lot of room for those 2 egos, in, even in a large arena.
Well, at that news conference, President-elect Trump said he supports the polio vaccine, and RFK Jr. now says he does too. But will that be enough for Senator Mitch McConnell, who is a polio survivor, to support Kennedy as Secretary of Health and Human Services? Or do you think this pick is on shaky ground? What do you think, Marianne?
Well, I think all the picks are on shaky ground. But Mitch McConnell is an interesting factor. Yes, a polio victim, no doubt. But he has always talked a tough game and then backed down. So he never voted to convict Trump in the impeachment investigations. He didn't even defend his wife when Trump went after her, and she was part of the cabinet. The difference now is, looks like Mitch McConnell's not going to run for re-election in 2026, and that might embolden him to take on Donald Trump finally.
What do you think?
Well, I think McConnell is emboldened, and he could well vote against Kennedy. And let's face it, Kennedy is lying about his position on vaccinations.
On everything.
He is dangerous, very dangerous to the health of the United States and the people of the United States. But the problem here is that you might get a Democrat or two who vote for Kennedy. And so even if Republicans come out against him, he might squeak through that way.
I would like to, before we say goodbye for this roundtable, I'd like to talk about marking the passing of a Massachusetts politician, a political titan last week. Francis X. Bellotti died at the age of 101. He served as lieutenant governor in the early 60s. He was elected to the first of 3 terms as AG in 1974. He served in a precursor to the Navy SEALs. It wasn't called the SEALs at the time, but it was a precursor to that during World War II. And he was a father of 12. Governor Maura Healey called him a cherished mentor, colleague, and friend. Rob, his legacy and how it is even felt today, all these years after.
Well, very well respected, very well liked, and interesting that he's passed now with Maura Healey as governor. Bellotti was the first AG in modern times to run for governor in 1990. Didn't make it. There was then a streak of 3 additional AGs after that who ran for governor and didn't make it. Maura Healey broke that streak.
Janet Wu and I went to Bill Delahunt's funeral. We saw Bellotti at that funeral. And of all the dignitaries there, senators, governor, name them, they were all there. They all wanted to talk to Frank Bellotti. And I would add this note, Bellotti and Mike Dukakis, who you saw in that picture, not always the closest of friends, embraced in the church, hugged each other, and Wu smartly pointed out, she goes, this is an end of an era. And with Bellotti passing, indeed it is.
Well put. We will continue with who's naughty, who's nice on the political scene. Rob and Marianne, give Santa a little help.